Hey, it's good to see everybody this morning. Okay, so I've got two ground rules for today. So when I start talking in just a minute about the message, I want you to not think about somebody else. I know you're going to, and that's okay, but I at least want to tell you not to. I want you to think about you first and them second. Okay, that's ground rule number one. Ground rule number two is show a little grace. For some of you, show a lot of grace. All right? I don't know where your personality is and who you are, but a little grace is going to be needed for all of us. A lot of grace is going to be needed for some of us. So those are the two ground rules. Think about you first, not them, and then show a little bit of grace. So here's what we do in church. We do this all the time. We talk about loving one another. We talk about accepting one another. We talk about being connected to each other. We talk about loving our enemies and praying for those people who persecute you. And so this is a common theme in Christianity. Therefore, it is a common theme in church. All those things are absolutely true. I don't want you to think that they're not after I get done with this morning. But there is another side to the coin. There are some people that are toxic. There are some relationships that are not good for you. And so God knows this. He understands it. And so love, yes. Forgive, yes. Trust, sometimes. Okay? Because we know people, right? Okay? We do. We know people. We can trust God all the time. We can't trust people all the time. Jesus understood that about folks. But we understand that some relationships that we get into, they're toxic relationships because they're toxic people. And the thing, just as we go, we've all been toxic, okay? We've all been that guy. We've all been that girl. That's where the grace part comes in, because you're not without fault in anything that we talk about this morning. But we just need to know that there are some relationships that you need to have sometimes physical distance between you and another person. We understand that. We acknowledge that in our judicial system. We call that a restraining order. Like, you're not allowed within 100 yards of that person. The second thing is not necessarily physical distance, but emotional distance from people. So just because you recognize you need some emotional distance from a person doesn't mean that you don't love them. Doesn't mean that you don't care about their ultimate eternal salvation. It doesn't mean that you're not, thinking about them from time to time. It just means that they make you a worse you rather than a better you. And so it's just some skills, some life skills we need to have. So here are 10 examples of toxic people. Remember grace, okay? Remember, you think about you first, them second. So number one is the gossip. Eleanor Roosevelt said this, that great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, small minds discuss people. So here's the definition for gossipers, that they derive pleasure from other people's misfortunes. It might be fun for us, and we've all been guilty of this. It might be fun for us to peer into somebody else's personal or professional faux pas at first, but over time it gets tiring. It ought to make you feel a little gross on the inside, and it ends up hurting other people along the way. Here's the second toxic. I've got 10 of these I'm going to run through real quick. So here's the second toxic person, is the temperamental. This is the girl. This is the guy that has absolutely little to no control over their emotions. And when they fly off the handle in anger or just get kind of just twisted up in jealousy, it's your fault. I mean, you're right. You made them feel that way. They never take responsibility for their lack of control in their temperament. So that's the third one is the victim. This is the third toxic person. And victims are tough to identify because you're like, I'm so sorry. Man, your world is crushing right now, and it's just coming down to like nothing but rubble, and I want to help you. But here's what happens. But as time passes, you begin to realize that their time of need is all the time. It's like every day. It's like there's this uncrossable mountain that happens in their life on a weekly basis, and you're the only one that can help. Okay, and so we know just the victim, it's a toxic person. Number 4 is a self-absorbed. They keep this impassionate distance between you and somebody, between themselves and you, because they're always thinking about them. So this self-absorbed individual. Number 5 is the envious. The grass is always greener somewhere else. There's a better relationship, a better girlfriend, a better boyfriend, a better car, a better house. There's always something else. And there's never any sense of satisfaction in them. And if you get around them and you get a part of that relationship with them, it's going to be difficult. Number 6 is the manipulator. The manipulators, they suck time and energy out of your life under the facade of friendship. And so they want to be your friend. They feel like they're your friend. But as time goes on in the relationship, you begin to realize that they take and they take and they take. There's never any giving back into a friendship. Now, we know this, I mean, as far as friendships go, that there's always some kind of benefit that we receive in friendships, but it's not all take, right? I mean, there's got to be some giving for it to be a healthy relationship and friendship. Number 7 is called the Dementor. I did not read the Harry Potter series. I had young children at the house at the time, and there was no time. I wouldn't have read it anyway. But so J.K. Rowling, she came up with this word, the Dementors. She said Dementors are evil creatures that suck people's souls out of their bodies, leaving them merely as shells of humans. And so somebody was asking her in an interview, like, hey, I mean, where'd you come up with this idea of a dementor that sucks the life out of people and leaves them a shell of their former person? And she was like, the highly negative people in your life, you know, they come into a room, and it's like any life that was in the room is gone. Because the sky is falling, the sky is black. I mean, the cup is not half full, it's empty. It's empty all the time. And so you get around these negative people in your life and they just suck the life out of you. It's a toxic, if you've ever been in one of those relationships, it's toxic. Number 8 is the twisted. And so there are certain toxic people that they're not doing this just by accident. They're intentionally trying to create misery in your life and in that relationship. And it's like they feed off of it, they enjoy it, they seek it out, and they are the twisted. There's the judgmental. They're the ones that will always tell you what's cool and what's not cool. And whatever it is that you're passionate about, they will suck the joy out of that and say to you, basically, you have no reason to be excited about this because it's just not an excitable type of thing. And so they judge us in lots of different ways. And then the last one, the 10th one, is the arrogant. And the arrogant see everything as a personal challenge to them. You make more money than they do, or they make more money than you do, and so it's a challenge to you to be as good as them. They look better than you do. They've got more education than you do. If you get into a conversation, they always have a better story to tell than what you do, and so everything becomes a personal challenge to them. So there's lots of different relationship dynamics that are out there that we come across in business, and we come across in friendships, and we come across sometimes even in church, because really that's what Jude is talking about today, that we begin to recognize that there are just some toxic relationships out there. Now, again, just to balance this a little bit for you, God's not saying don't love them. He's just saying love them from a distance. We talked about this today in life group. It's like sometimes I think the best way to love people who really make you a worse you is to just do them no harm. Like wish no evil upon them at all. Just keep your distance. Keep your distance sometimes, again, physically. Keep your distance sometimes emotionally and relationally, because it's just not good. It's not good for them. It's not good for you. You recognize all these kind of signs that are out there. So that's what Jude is talking about. Last week we talked about that he was just saying, listen, you got to be careful of the people who bear influence in your life. Today he names names, basically. I mean, he just says, look, these are the people that are in your group. You know who they are, and they're bad for you. They're bad for you. And so be on the watch for them. So here's where it is in Jude chapter 1. There's only one chapter, verses 12 and 13. He says, these are hidden reefs. He's talking about people. These are hidden reefs at your love feasts. They feast with you without fear, shepherds feeding themselves, waterless clouds swept along by the winds, fruitless trees in late autumn, twice dead, uprooted, wild waves of the sea, casting up the foam of their own shame, wandering stars for whom the gloom of utter darkness has been reserved forever. And so Jude is writing to a church in the first century, and he is saying, there are some people in your church that are not good. There are some people in your midst that are creating all sorts of problems, and you have got to see it for what it is. Jude, sometimes when you're looking at a circumstance from the outside in, you can see what's happening, and the people in the middle of it, they don't even know what's going on. And that's kind of what was happening with Jude. Jude was looking in from the outside and saying, these folks are no good. They're no good. You've got to get some distance between you and them. And so I'm going to show you, in addition to the 10 that we just talked through, 5 different relationships or 5 different types of toxic people that Jude tells the church, be careful with these folks. So number 1 is this, is be careful of those relationships that you get into with other people who have a long history of broken relationships. Long history of broken relationships. Now, all of us have got some relationships that have been broken. Sometimes it's been our fault, sometimes it's been their fault, but we've all got them. But there are some people that we become friends with. Maybe you date, maybe you marry them, maybe you go into business with them, that they literally, it is just a long history of broken relationships. You should see the writing on the wall before you ever get there, because chances are history is going to repeat itself. Yes? Yeah, it sounds like, everybody else was at fault. They're a good guy. She's a great girl. But guess what? This is what's gone on for the last 10 or 12 or 15 or 20 years of their life. And probably that's going to continue happening. So you better be careful. Here's how Jude says it. He says, they are hidden reefs at your love feasts as they feast with you without fear. And so we know what a reef is, right? A reef is that stuff that's right up underneath the surface of the water that will sink your ship if you drive across it. So there's this, it's called an atoll. I think it's just like a small island right off of the coast of Australia. And for 15 square miles around this thing, it's called Ken's Reefs Atoll. And so for 15 square miles around this thing, before ships had maps and they told each other where the bad spots were, it was like one shipwreck after another, because at high tide, 15 square miles around this little atoll was covered by about that much water. And so the ships thought, man, I'm 5 miles away from this thing. I can just blow right through there. And they couldn't, because they hit that reef that was hidden right under the surface of the water. And so there are people like that. There are relationships like that. You look at it, you think, this is going to be great. The water's calm and it's cool and it's great, and this is going to be, and I'm going to love him and she's going to love me, and we're just going to get along wonderful. We're going to have a great business situation, and you get into it, and then all of a sudden it's like your ship has sunk. This is bad. And we need to recognize that about some people, and by watching the history of their relationships, if there's a long history of broken relationships, then more than likely there will continue to be these broken relationships. Here's a passage over in 1 Timothy chapter 5. Good advice. He says, remember that the sins of some people, they're obvious, and it leads them to certain judgment. So it's like the sins are in front of them, and you can see them coming from a mile away. It's like somebody's got red flags and they're just waving them above their head going, I'm a problem child. And if you date me, if you get involved with me, this is what's going to happen to you. And you should be paying attention to that. But then he says this about other people. He says, but there are others whose sins will not be revealed until later. It's like their sins are trailing behind them like the wake behind a boat. It's like you don't know they're there till you've already crossed paths with them. And it's just the way people are. Now, none of us are perfect. Remember the grace thing, okay? We've all failed. We all got issues. We all got our own kind of stuff going on. But just understand that if you get into a relationship with somebody who's got a long history of broken relationships in the past, man, just know probably what you're going to get. So what you need to be looking for, are those who have a history of healthy relationships. People who have a great long history of getting along with their mom and their dad and their brothers and sisters and girlfriends and boyfriends, and they're just good folks, man. This is good folks. So that's what you need to be looking for. All right, number 2 is this. Second toxic relationship / person is people who are in a relationship for their good, but at your expense. Okay? So people who are in a relationship for their good, but at your expense. Now, the truth is this. It doesn't matter if it's a friendship or if it's a marriage, you've been married for 50 years. All of us are in a relationship to some degree for our good. I derive so many blessings out of the friendships that I have. I am so blessed through my marriage with my wife. I love having my kids. I am just blessed by that, okay? But it's not all for my good at their expense, okay? That's the key for us to understand. That if you get around other people that are in a relationship for their good, and it's almost always consistently at your expense, man, that's a toxic one. You need to be careful about that. Here's how Jude puts it in verse 12. He says, they're shepherds who are feeding only themselves. That is not the job of a shepherd. The job of a shepherd is to watch over the flock at night, to be there, to beat the wolf off if the wolf comes, or to pet the sheep whenever they need to be encouraged. I mean, that's the job of a shepherd. That's the job of mom, right? I mean, same thing. Shepherd, dad, you got it, okay? Even a friend, we are our brother's keeper. We need to be involved in the lives of other people, caring for them, for their good at our expense, right? So whenever you read the Old Testament or the New Testament, there's one thing God just particularly hates. And it's when religious leaders or leaders of his people in some form or fashion or another are in it for their good at the expense of the people that God has given them to lead. So I'm going to read you two different places. One from the Old, one from the New Testament. First is in Ezekiel chapter 34. He says, Son of man, I want you to prophesy against the shepherds or the leaders of Israel. Give them this message from the sovereign Lord. What sorrow awaits you shepherds who feed yourselves instead of the flocks? Shouldn't shepherds feed their sheep? And so God looks at these leaders of Israel back in Ezekiel's day and he says, man, these guys are in trouble. They're in trouble because they're in a relationship for their good at the expense of other people. Jesus says something similar to this over in the New Testament in Matthew 23. He says, what sorrow awaits you teachers of religious law and the Pharisees. So here's the religious people. Hypocrites, you cross land and sea to make one convert, and then you turn that person into twice the child of hell that you yourselves are. And so if you watch God just reserves just the utmost contempt for people who should be helping others toward God, but really they're in the relationship for their good at the expense of other people. God he does not like that at all. But you can take that same kind of application and move it into your relationships. Because if you're a husband and it's for your good at their expense, guess what? That's not good. I mean, if you're a wife, because wives do this too, it's not just the guys, they get into a marriage for their good at the expense of a husband. It's not good. It's toxic. Sometimes parents and even kids, you can go either way with this kind of depending on the circumstance, but they have children, kids get a little bit older, and they start seeing the children to be there, and they recognize those kids are there, and they're using that relationship for their good at the expense of their children. Parents do that sometimes to their own kids. It's just wrong. It's wrong, and it's toxic, and it shouldn't be that way. The way that it's supposed to be for us is that we love one another. Here's what Jesus says in John 15. He says, this is my commandment. I want you to love each other in the same way that I've loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for his friends. And so that is the way that we're supposed to handle relationships. I don't have a relationship with you. You don't have a relationship with other people for your good at their expense. We're supposed to have relationships with each other, okay, for the benefit of another person at our expense. Because isn't that what God did? I mean, isn't that what Jesus did on the cross? I mean, he came to initiate and to establish a relationship with you and I for our good at his expense. That's what a healthy relationship looks like in marriage. It's what it looks like in friendship, what it looks like even in business, and what it looks like in church as well. So here's number 3 about toxic people. Promising people who only disappoint. Promising people who only disappoint. Now again, listen, you've been married, you have disappointed your husband. Somewhere along the line. If you've been married, then you've disappointed your wife. And we have all, again, this is the grace part. We've all been a disappointment to somebody who felt that we were going to be so promising. But you understand the difference here, okay? There are some people in some relationships that on the surface it looks like it's going to be great. It's going to be smooth sailing. But man, right up underneath that water was just like this rocky reef. And they looked so promising. But in the end, it was only just one disappointment after another, after another, after another. And those are the relationships that we have got to be careful with. Here's how Jude says it. He says, they're waterless clouds swept along by the winds, and they are fruitless trees in late autumn, twice dead and uprooted. So if you're in an agricultural society, you walk outside, we don't have the Weather Channel to tell you the weather is for the next 15 days out. So you walk outside, you see this cloud rolling in, it's a little dark, it's a little gray, you're thinking, oh man, that's a promise of rain. And then the wind kicks up and blows the cloud out of there. And so this cloud came in and it looked promising, but what did it deliver? Nothing. Nothing. It was only a disappointment. Or you walk outside in late autumn and you look at this tree and think, I can't wait to get an apple off of the tree. They didn't have HEB. You can go buy all that stuff. You'd pull it off the tree yourself. So you go over to the tree expecting there to be some fruit. It looks incredibly promising to you, but when you get there, there's only disappointment. You ever been in a relationship like that? I mean, we all have to some degree. You know, they promise you the world. Man, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to be this person, I'm going to change, I promise this time I'm going to change. And there's so much promise on the horizon, but in the end, it's just one disappointment after another, after another, after another. We've got to be careful of those relationships, careful of those toxic ones that are out there, because it ends up damaging us and hurting us. Rather, what we need to be is just good, right? I mean, doesn't that make sense? Like, hang out with people who are good, who you can love, who are going to love you back, and there's this healthy dynamic in the relationship. But sometimes we struggle with that. We're just looking for anything and everything, warm body. But let me tell you, if you're just looking for a warm body, then it's going to hurt. It's going to end up damaging and bringing a lot of pain and a lot of suffering to your life. All right, number 4, shameless people. Toxic relationships connected to people who have no shame. Easy to see these in our day and time. This is a good thing. You know, go check out their pictures on Facebook. Go look at their Instagram. You know, go look at YouTube. Go look and see what they write. Go look and see how they respond to things. Go see what they've posted. Just go look, because you find out real quick if somebody has humility, if somebody has shame, if somebody has any modesty, if they have any decency in their life. I mean, those things are pretty easy to find. I mean, you can see that. You can also see if somebody is shameless, without shame in their life. Because here's the thing. If they've been that way for this amount of time, then what do you think is going to happen when you start dating them? What do you think is going to happen if you marry them? What do you think is going to happen if you build a good friendship with them? The same thing's going to happen unless God changes their heart. Here's how Jude puts them. He says, they're wild waves of the sea, casting up the foam of their own shame. If you've ever been around the ocean during a storm, I mean, literally the ocean foams. I don't know why it does that or how it does that, but it does. And Jude saw that. He was like, man, this is like these people, they're like casting up the foam of their own shame. They're like shameless people, man. They're just out there just going, man, look at me, look at me, look at me. So if you get around people that they're like, man, let me tell you how drunk I got on Friday night. It was, I don't know why people think this is a great story. I was so drunk, man. I was like passed out, throwing up, woke up in the morning on the bathroom floor. I don't know what's fun about that. But, you know, people talk that way. Or guys talk about, man, this girl that I went and slept with. Or girls talk about this guy that I went and slept with. Or people talk about, man, they said that to me, and let me tell you how I spoke to them. I put them in their place. I cursed them up and down the wall. They felt horrible after I was done with them. Who wants to be friends with people like that? Who wants to be a person like that? I would think that you want to be good. I would think that you might want to be kind of like Jesus. I mean, nobody's perfect, but I mean, at least you're trying to kind of be like him. And so if you get around people who are shameless about the things that they have done that are not good, I don't know what would attract you to that individual. Don't go for just the warm body, okay? Go for the good people, the people who love the Lord and have a relationship with him, that exercise a little bit of self-control in their own life, a little bit of decency about who they are as a person. All right, number 5, this last one. Another toxic relationship that you need to try and avoid. And it's those people who are untethered from God, those people who are untethered from him. This is interesting. Jude says in verse 13, he calls these people wandering stars, for whom the gloom of utter darkness has been reserved forever. Let me just ask you this. Do stars wander? No, they don't. I mean, they stay put. They don't go anywhere. It's how we navigate. I know we have GPS on our watches and phones now, but ultimately, the North Star is in the north all the time. In the constellations, they're always in the same place every single night. Stars don't just drift and wander. But people like these folks in this book, they get untethered from God, and it's like these wanderings. They're all over the place. They are disconnected from God. And if you date somebody like that, if you marry somebody like that, if you raise somebody like that, if you get into a great friendship with somebody like that is completely untethered from God, your relationship with them is going to be hard. I'm not saying it can't be redeemed. That's what Jesus came and died on the cross for. But I'm just saying it's going to be a tough one for you. And so be careful of the relationships that you find yourselves a part of. So we're going to end with this, two things. Number one is this. Let's think about you, not them, okay? Maybe you've seen yourself in part of this. The first 10 that we talked about, or the last 5 that Jude kind of just laid out for us. Maybe you saw yourself in one of those. Our tendency is to dismiss that, to say, no, it's really not that bad, or that's not me, it's their fault, to project it on somebody else, our problems. Just don't do that for a minute. Just own it. Say, yep, that's true of me, okay? Because that's the first step in kind of fixing things for you. The second thing is to remember what Christ has come to do for you, that at his expense and for your good, he came and died on the cross for you, that you might become a new creation in Christ. And so if we really want to just be done with the toxic stuff in the relationships that we have with friends and family and people that we're married to, the way you do that is to be filled with the Spirit. Because if you remember what it's like to be filled with the Spirit, actually Scripture tells us this, that the fruit of the Spirit, the outcome of God living inside of you is love, is joy, it's peace, it's patience, it's kindness, it's gentleness, it's goodness, and it's self-control. I mean, people with those characteristics make great friends. People with those characteristics make great husbands, and they make great wives, and they make great people to go into business with. Those are great people to surround yourself with. And so, yes, love, even your enemies. Pray for those people who persecute you. But just be aware that there are some toxic relationships out there that you want to distance yourself from. And if you're the toxic one, okay, you know that. If you're the toxic one, you just need to know that Jesus is the only answer, because all those things I just laid out about goodness and faithfulness and self-control and kindness and patience and peace and love, I mean, that happens when you're changed. That happens when your heart is different. And so I want to pray for you, and I want you to think about you, not them, okay?